Good morning, and thank you for joining us at short notice. My name is Jared Genser, and I serve as international counsel to Juan, Sebastián Chamorro, and Félix Maradiaga, two of the 7 disappeared or detained 10 opposition presidential candidates in Nicaragua. We are grateful for you joining us this morning, and I will just note at the outset that the press conference will be conducted both in Spanish and in English. Unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish myself personally, but my colleague will post a link to my remarks in Spanish into the chat box. To our profound dismay, today marks 50 days since Juan Sebastián and Félix were disappeared by Daniel Ortega. They've had no contact with either their families or lawyers ever since. It is important to emphasize that this kind of extended disappearance, totally outside any valid legal process, constitutes torture as a matter of international law. With me, of course, are Juan Sebastián's wife, Victoria Cardenas, and Félix's wife, Berta Valle. After some brief opening remarks, I'll ask each of them to speak, and then we will open up the floor for questions. I will first give the opportunity to journalists to ask questions, and then to the broader audience. As many of you know, last week, we spent 4 days in Washington engaged in a wide array of activities to advance the freedom of now more than 140 political prisoners in Nicaragua. This included meeting people like Organization of American States Secretary General Luis Almagro, senior White House and State Department officials, US senators and members of Congress, and foreign government representatives to the OAS, as well as a wide array of think tanks and civil society groups. In addition, Vicky and Berta also testified before the US Congress. They participated in a protest at the Embassy of Nicaragua and spoke at think tank events sponsored by the Atlantic Council and Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Late yesterday, the Nicaragua Public Ministry and Nicaragua National Police published press releases reporting that the Ortega regime has found them summarily guilty in absentia and without charge or trial of being, quote, traitors to the homeland, based on so-called investigations that had allegedly been conducted. It's worth quoting directly from the public ministry's press release to appreciate how directly Ortega is targeting them in retaliation and as a reprisal for them having spoken to senior officials of President Biden's administration in the White House, State Department, and USAID, as well as to US senators and members of Congress. Specifically, the public ministry said, and I quote, "Last week, Berta Adelma Valle Otero and Victoria Eugenia Cardenas Lacayo held various meetings with senators, members of Congress, and other officials of the United States government, meetings in which they solicited the use of, quote, pressure mechanisms against Nicaragua, end quote. For this reason, the National Police carried out an investigation, and the public ministry, having conducted the necessary analysis, will present an accusation since such actions are considered violative of the internal legal system. There are clear indicators they have attacked the Nicaraguan society and the rights of the people in conformity with Law 1055 and the Penal Code. They have brought about actions that undermine the independence, the sovereignty, and self-determination of Nicaragua, and they have publicly solicited in various international fora the foreign interference in internal issues, requesting economic, commercial, and financial blockades against the state of Nicaragua, its institutions, and its citizens. Of course, these claims that Vicky and Berta are solely appealing to the United States are totally off base. Indeed, in the weeks prior to their Washington trip, they met with EU Special Representative for Human Rights, a group of 12 members of the European Parliament across 5 political parties that then succeeded in getting a new resolution on Nicaragua adopted, and with a senior official of the Catholic Church, among many others. Nonetheless, this unprecedented legal assault on Vicky and Berta is truly stunning in many different ways. First, there's really no other way to describe what Ortega has done here as anything other than a monumentally dumb move. Does he think he really is going to succeed in silencing Vicky or Berta by threatening them personally when he's already disappeared their husbands? Does he actually believe that he will increase global or domestic support for his regime by attacking 2 incredibly brave women who are simply wives and mothers desperate for any information that their husbands are still alive after 50 days? And does he think that given President Biden's commitment to making human rights central to his foreign policy, that he will do nothing when Vicky and Berta are literally and explicitly being punished for meeting his top White House advisor on the Western Hemisphere, Juan Gonzalez, Undersecretary of State Uzur Zaya, and USAID Administrator Samantha Power? The answer to all these questions is clearly yes. Second, Vicky and Berta have been summarily found guilty as traitors to the homeland without the regime even bothering with the pretense of presenting their case before a judge or court of law. This is also of enormous concern because it has raised the possibility that Ortega may next charge them with a crime such as treason, which, if convicted, could result in sentences of life imprisonment. Clearly, Ortega thinks he can get away with anything, and his impunity is total and absolute. And third, Ortega decided to make this major move against Vicky and Berta just days before completing his transparent and relentless campaign he launched in early June to fully decapitate Nicaragua's political opposition. Indeed, it has now been confirmed that literally none of the 10 declared opposition presidential candidates will be nominated by a political party to run against Daniel Ortega by the deadline of August 2nd, 2021. And as of the following day, the world can conclude the elections will be neither free nor fair. No one should misinterpret Daniel Ortega's actions. This is a man who is showing the world that he is profoundly weak and desperate. He knows he has lost all popular support from the Nicaraguan people after murdering more than 330 and injuring 2,200 after the popular nonviolent protests in April 2018. He knows that if any of the leading opposition candidates were allowed to run against him, he would lose. Why else would he need to detain or disappear 7 of them? At the same time, despite his profound weakness, he clearly believes he's in a very strong position to steal the forthcoming elections with absolute impunity because he's convinced no one cares enough about the Nicaraguan people to do anything. And in that way, as a final gambit to destroy the resolve of the few left in Nicaragua still willing to challenge him, he has issued a public challenge to world leaders by his brazen actions. His question will be answered one way or another on August 3rd. If he wakes up to a world of perfunctory condemnations, then his calculations will be correct. And it is therefore incumbent on the international community to ensure that he is shocked by the serious and devastating actions that will be undertaken by the EU, Canada, Australia, the US, UN, and OAS, among others. Let me now introduce both Vicky and Berta for their remarks. Vicky, why don't you go ahead first?
Buenos días. Durante los últimos 50 días, he levantado mi voz para abogar por la liberación de mi esposo, Juan Sebastián Chamorro, que fue desaparecido por el régimen de Daniel Ortega el 8 de junio del 2021. Todos mis llamamientos a la comunidad internacional para proteger y defender los derechos humanos en Nicaragua lo hice como una esposa y una madre. Pero anoche me convertí en el nuevo objeto de la represión del régimen de Ortega. La Policía Nacional de Nicaragua anunció la apertura de una investigación en mi caso por la comisión de delitos bajo la Ley 1055 o la Ley de Defensa de los Derechos del Pueblo a la Independencia, la Soberanía y Autodeterminación para la Paz. Poco después, el Ministerio Público de Nicaragua declaró que se inició la investigación porque Berta y yo sostuvimos varias reuniones con senadores, congresistas y otros funcionarios del gobierno de Estados Unidos. El Ministerio Público concluyó que había hecho el debido análisis y que mis acciones violaron el ordenamiento jurídico de Nicaragua. Pasé la última semana en Washington abogando por la libertad de mi esposo y la libertad de todos los presos políticos de Nicaragua, con oficiales de la administración del presidente Biden, el Congreso de los Estados Unidos, embajadores, líderes regionales, grupos de la sociedad civil, defensores de derechos humanos. Por esto, el régimen de Ortega me ha etiquetado como traidora a la patria. Una traidora a la patria por pedir pruebas de que mi esposo sigue vivo. Una traidora a la patria por pedirle a Daniel Ortega que respete nuestra Constitución y el derecho internacional. Una traidora a la patria por atreverme a soñar con un futuro en que todos los nicaragüenses puedan vivir vidas pacíficas y dignas. Me han acusado de los mismos delitos fundados de los que acusaron a mi esposo hace 50 días, pero mi único delito ha sido abogar por la libertad, democracia y derechos humanos por todos los nicaragüenses. Con la investigación abierta es posible que, si soy condenada, podría ser sentenciada a cadena perpetua. Pero no tengo miedo. No reconozco las leyes ilegales que Daniel Ortega ha manipulado para mantener su control sobre el poder. Al final del día, nuestros derechos humanos prevalecerán. Ayer Berta y yo fuimos esposa y madre abogando por la liberación de nuestros esposos. Hoy somos 2 de los cientos de defensores de derechos humanos que han sido perseguidos por Daniel Ortega y su régimen por hablar en contra de la opción de su régimen. Solo hay un traidor a la patria y es Daniel Ortega. ha violado nuestras instituciones, ha abusado, amenazado y asesinado a nuestro pueblo, ha hecho todo lo posible para consolidar su poder y ha pisoteado repetidamente la Constitución de Nicaragua y sus obligaciones internacionales en el proceso. Las últimas 6 semanas ha utilizado una de las estrategias más vulnerables para silenciar a su oposición: desapariciones forzadas. En América hemos visto por décadas la devastación de esta práctica, porque las dictaduras en toda la región han desaparecido a oponentes. El régimen de Daniel Ortega es igual de malo al régimen de los 70 y 80, que desaparecieron a los políticos, activistas, campesinos y cualquier persona que intentó hablar. Deberíamos seguir llamando a Daniel Ortega por lo que es, un dictador. Antes de concluir, quiero hacer algunos comentarios breves sobre las próximas elecciones presidenciales. Es difícil que hace 2 meses había 10 candidatos declarados de la oposición, incluyendo mi esposo y el esposo de Berta, que estuvieron de acuerdo en que iban a correr en contra de Daniel Ortega y que a través de un proceso transparente, abierto y democrático seleccionarían un solo candidato que todos apoyarían. Con esta decisión, la oposición estaba más unida de lo que había estado en décadas. Ortega sabía que nunca podría ganar contra ninguno de los principales candidatos, y mucho menos cuando se unirían detrás de una persona para postularse en su contra. Por eso, así desapareció o detuvo a 7 de los 10 candidatos y ahora ninguno de ellos será nominado para postularse contra Ortega. La única conclusión objetiva de estos hechos es que no habrá candidatos de la oposición que se postulen contra Ortega, porque todos han sido bloqueados para postularse. Sabemos que hay mucho en juego para permanecer en silencio. Con más de 30 líderes opositores, periodistas, líderes sindicales, estudiantes y campesinos desaparecidos en las últimas 6 semanas, debemos seguir condenando los abusos de los derechos humanos de Daniel Ortega y su régimen. Puede ser que intenten utilizar esta investigación para silenciarme, pero no descansaré hasta que mi esposo y todos los demás presos políticos sean liberados. Muchas gracias. Good morning. For the last 50 days, I have been raising my voice, advocating for the liberation of my husband, Juan Sebastián Chamorro, who was disappeared by the regime of Daniel Ortega on June 8, 2021. In all my appeals to the international community to protect and defend human rights in Nicaragua, I did so as a wife and a mother. But last night, I became the newest target of the Ortega regime wave of repression. The Nicaraguan National Police announced that it had opened an investigation in my case for committing crimes under Law 1055, Law of Defense of the Rights of the People to Independence, Sovereignty, and Self-Determination for Peace. Shortly thereafter, the Public Ministry of Nicaragua released a statement saying that the investigation was initiated because Berta and I held various meetings with senators, members of Congress, and other officials of the United States government. The Public Ministry then concluded that it had conducted the necessary analysis and that my actions were in violation of Nicaragua's legal system. I spent last week in Washington advocating for my husband's freedom and freedom for all Nicaragua's political prisoners with officials of President Biden's administration, the US Congress, ambassadors, regional leaders, civil society groups, and human rights defenders. For this, the Ortega regime has labeled me traitor to the homeland. A traitor to the homeland for asking for proof that my husband is still alive. A traitor to the homeland for asking Daniel Ortega to respect our constitution and international law. A traitor to the homeland for daring to dream of a future in which all Nicaraguans can live peaceful lives of dignity. I have been charged with all the same outrageous crimes that my husband was charged 50 days ago. But my only real crime has been to advocate for freedom, democracy, and human rights for all Nicaraguans. With the investigation open in my case, it is possible that if convicted, I could be sentenced to life in prison. But I am not afraid. I know that we have the truth on my side. I do not recognize the illegal laws that Daniel Ortega has manipulated to maintain his grip on power. At the end of the day, our human rights will prevail. Yesterday, Berta and I were wives and mothers advocating for our husband's release. Today, we are 2 of the 100 of human rights defenders who have been persecuted by Daniel Ortega and his regime for speaking out against the oppression of his regime. There is only one traitor to the homeland, and he is Daniel Ortega. He has for years undermined and manipulated our institutions. He has abused, threatened, and killed our people. He has done everything he can to consolidate his power. He has repeatedly trampled on Nicaragua's constitution and its international law obligations along the way. And in the last 6 weeks, he has used one of the dirtiest strategies imaginable to silence his opposition, enforce disappearances. In the Americas, we have seen for decades how devastating this tactic is, as dictatorships from all over the region have disappeared their opponents. The regime of Daniel Ortega is just as bad as the brutal regimes of the 70s and 80s that disappeared politicians, activists, peasants, students, and anyone else who tried to speak out. We must continue to call Daniel Ortega what he is, a dictator. Before I conclude, let me make some brief comments on the forthcoming presidential elections. It is hard to believe that just 2 months ago, there were 10 declared opposition candidates, including my husband and Berta's, who agreed they will all run against Ortega, and that through a transparent, open, and democratic process, they will select a single candidate who they will all then support. By this decision, the opposition was more united than it had been in decades. Ortega knew he could never win against any of the leading candidates, let alone once they united behind one person to oppose him. And so he disappeared or detained 7 of the 10 candidates, and now none of them will be nominated to run against Ortega. The only objective conclusion one can reach from these facts is there will be no opposition candidates running against Ortega because they have all been blocked from running. We know that it takes time to stay silent. With more than 30 opposition leaders, journalists, labor leaders, students, and peasants disappeared in the last 6 weeks, we must continue to highlight the human rights abuses of Daniel Ortega and his regime. He may try to use this investigation to silence me, but I will not give up or in until my husband and all of the other political prisoners are freed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, muchas gracias, Victoria, Vicky, for those really compelling remarks. Let me now turn it over to Berta for you to present your remarks as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Jared. Gracias, Victoria, por tus palabras. Gracias porque me siento tan orgullosa de vos, de tu valentía y de tener tu compañía en este proceso de defensa de nuestros esposos. Buenos días a todos. Gracias por su participación en esta conferencia. Mientras observaba la reciente ola de represión del régimen de Daniel Ortega contra todos los que hablan en su contra, pensaba que era solo cuestión de tiempo antes de que me atacara también. Este tipo de opresión no es nuevo para mí. Durante los últimos 3 años pasados he vivido en el exilio, incapaz de regresar a mi país por las amenazas y violencia que enfrenté en manos del régimen de Daniel Ortega. En las últimas 6 semanas también llegué a entender que hablar en nombre de mi marido era algo que enojaría al régimen. Pero me sorprendió y me entristeció saber anoche que el régimen de Daniel Ortega abrió las mismas razones por las que mi esposo, Félix Maradiaga, fue desaparecido hace 50 días. Acusaciones de traición por menoscabar la independencia, la soberanía y autodeterminación de Nicaragua y otros crímenes. La supuesta razón detrás de esta investigación es la campaña de defensa en la que Vicky y yo nos hemos embarcado para poder reunirnos con nuestros maridos. La semana pasada, Vicky y yo viajamos a Washington, D.C. para reunirnos con funcionarios de la administración del presidente Biden, el Congreso de los Estados Unidos, embajadores, líderes multilaterales, organizaciones de la sociedad civil y grupos de derechos humanos, con la esperanza de que nuestros esposos pronto sean liberados. Ellos nos recibieron con los brazos abiertos, con compasión y solidaridad. Funcionarios de varios gobiernos se comprometieron a no olvidar a nuestros maridos y a hacer todo lo posible para abogar por su liberación. Es tan molesto, entonces, que mi propio gobierno no solo sigue manteniendo a Félix desaparecido y lejos de su familia, sino que también ha aumentado sus ataques contra mí, llamándome una traidora de la patria. En todo caso, ¿verdad? Sigo alzando mi voz porque amo a Nicaragua y a nuestro pueblo. Desde hace semanas denunciamos las violaciones de los derechos humanos en los casos de nuestros maridos y de los demás presos políticos, especialmente las violaciones al debido proceso. Fueron detenidos y desaparecieron sin orden judicial, fueron llevados ante un juez y sus abogados presentes, fueron sentenciados a 90 días de detención judicial, han sido desaparecidos sin acceso a sus familiares o abogados, y la lista sigue y sigue. Pero ahora también ha habido graves violaciones al debido proceso en nuestros casos. Vicky y yo hemos sido efectivamente declaradas culpables de los cargos presentados contra nosotras, basadas en investigaciones llevadas a cabo por el Ministerio Público y la Policía Nacional. Ni nosotras ni nuestros abogados hemos tenido la oportunidad de impugnar estos cargos en una corte. Y después de la declaración del Ministerio Público, simplemente no hay manera de que cualquier procedimiento legal posterior pueda ser legítimo. Daniel Ortega nos ha acusado a Vicky y a mí de la misma ley que usó para descalificar a candidatos presidenciales. Nosotras no tenemos aspiraciones presidenciales, pero Ortega parece tan nervioso que está dispuesto a hacer cualquier cosa para asegurarse de que nadie se postulará en las elecciones de noviembre, incluso estas dos esposas y madres. Las acciones de ayer confirman lo que conocemos desde hace mucho tiempo. Daniel Ortega se siente vulnerable y hará todo lo que pueda para aferrarse al poder. El inicio de esta investigación contra Vicky y yo no es un signo de fuerza, sino de verdadera debilidad. Incluso pedir que se respeten los derechos humanos más básicos en Nicaragua para tener acceso a nuestros seres queridos es criminalizado. Si Daniel Ortega está tan enojado que Vicky y yo estemos abogando por la liberación de los presos políticos, todo lo que tiene que hacer es liberar a los presos políticos. Él es el único que puede resolver su problema. No se trata de traición, injerencia extranjera o soberanía. Se trata del pueblo nicaragüense y de los derechos más básicos que merece. Vicky y yo seguiremos haciendo todo lo posible para asegurarnos de que un día nosotras y todas las otras 146 familias podamos reunirnos con nuestros seres queridos. Gracias. Good morning. Thank you for your participation in this press conference. As I watch the recent wave of repression by Daniel Ortega's regime target all those who speak out against him, I had a feeling it was only a matter of time before he targeted me too. This kind of oppression is not new to me. For the last 3 years, I've lived in exile, unable to return to my beloved country because of the threats of violence I face at the hands of the Ortega regime. In the last 6 weeks, I also came to understand that speaking out on behalf of my husband was something that would anger the regime. But I was shocked and saddened to learn that last night, Daniel Ortega's regime opened an investigation of me for the exact same reason that my husband, Félix Maradiaga, was disappeared for 50 days ago. Accusation of treason for undermining the independence and sovereignty and self-determination of Nicaragua, and other crimes. The supposed rationale behind this investigation is a campaign of advocacy that Vicky and I have embarked on to once again be reunited with our husbands. Last week, Vicky and I traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with officials of President Biden's administration, the U.S. Congress, ambassadors, multilateral leaders, civil society organizations, and human rights groups, all in the hope that our husbands will soon be released. We were met with open arms, compassion, and solidarity. Officials from many governments pledged not to forget our husbands and to do everything possible to advocate for their release. It is so upsetting then that my own government not only continues to keep Félix disappear and away from his family, but also that it has increased its attacks on me by calling me a traitor of the homeland. If anything, I continue to raise my voice because I love Nicaragua and our people. For weeks, we have been denouncing the human rights violation in the cases of our husbands and the other political prisoners, especially the due process violations. They were arrested and disappeared without warrants. They were brought before a judge without their lawyers present. They were sentenced to 90 days judicial detention. They had been held without access to their families or lawyers. The list goes on and on. But now there have been serious due process violation in our cases too. Vicky and I have been effectively found guilty on the charges brought against us based on the investigations carried out by the public ministry and national police. Neither we nor our lawyers have had the opportunity to challenge these charges in court. And after the statement by the public ministry, there is simply no way that any subsequent legal proceedings can be legitimate. Daniel Ortega has charged Vicky and me with the same law that he used to disqualify presidential candidates from running for office. We don't have presidential aspirations, but Ortega seems too nervous that he is willing to do anything to make sure that no one will challenge him in November elections, even these two wives and mothers. Yesterday's actions confirm that we have known for a long time Daniel Ortega feels vulnerable and will do anything to claim to power. The opening of this investigation against Vicky and me is not a sign of strength, but one true weakness. Even asking for the most basic human rights to be defended in Nicaragua, for access to our loved ones, is criminalized. If Daniel Ortega is so angry that Vicky and I are advocating for the release of the political prisoners, all he must do is release the political prisoners. He is the only one that can fix his problem. This is not about treason or foreign interference or sovereignty. This is about Nicaraguan people and the most basic rights they deserve. And Vicky and I will continue doing everything we can to ensure that one day we and all of the other 146 families can be reunited with their loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Berta, for your also compelling remarks. I mean, I think that the grace and the courage and the dignity with which both Berta and Vicky are advocating for the release of their husbands from these disappearances, and for all of the other victims of Ortega's abuses, most especially the 146 as of today political prisoners in the country, has really struck an extraordinarily strong chord with all the people that we met last week and that we are continuing to meet. And ultimately, I don't see any scenario in which any fair-minded person would see what Vicky and Berta are doing as being anything more than simply demanding the proof of life of their husbands who have disappeared now for more than 50 days. So let's now turn it open for questions from the floor. If you would like to speak, I'll just ask you to put a note in the chat box and I will call on you. If journalists first, I'd like to give journalists first the opportunity to ask any questions. I see already Carolina Jackson, I hope you're a journalist. Oh, not a journalist. Okay. So if there are journalists first that want to ask a question, I'll come back to you, Carolina. Are there journalists that would like to ask a question? Also, my colleague, Michael Russo on the call will translate questions either from English to Spanish or Spanish to English, and also summarize in translation any response that's given by any of us. So first up is Ivan Taylor from Univision Miami.
Jared, if I can just chime in quickly and translate the instructions for the Q&A.
Sure.
Ahora procederemos a una discusión más abierta con preguntas de la audiencia. Primero con periodistas, por favor, y después con la audiencia más amplia. Si le gustaría preguntar algo, por favor, ponga su nombre y afiliación en el chat. Y después de las preguntas y respuestas, yo voy a resumir las preguntas y respuestas en inglés o español. Depende de la situación. Gracias.
Great. Mr. Taylor.
Hi, how are you? I hope you guys can hear me, right?
We can.
Okay. Should I ask the question in English or should I ask it in Spanish?
Either way, I mean, perhaps if you wanted to ask it in Spanish, you can translate yourself, or if you wanted, Michael can translate for you.
Okay, I'm going to ask in Spanish. Gracias por permitirme participar en el foro. Una de las inquietudes que nos quedan a nosotros es con esta orden de detención que emite el régimen de Daniel Ortega, implica de que una vez que lleguen, es decir, más allá de que una vez de que estas esposas lleguen a Managua serían detenidas, pero ¿acaso implica también de que el régimen podría ordenar la detención de ellas fuera de Nicaragua?
Thank you very much for the question. Jared, he's asking if this order of detention, if it implies that if they went to Managua, they could be detained, but outside of that, is there a possibility that they could be detained outside of Nicaragua?
Sure. So it's unclear exactly what the Ortega regime will do next, but I can't imagine any scenario in which the United States would ever agree to extradite Berta and Vicky to Nicaragua to face any charges emanating from the Ortega regime. He could try to go to Interpol. Interpol has gotten much better in recent years in understanding what abusive red notices are. These are international arrest warrants. And undoubtedly, I think Interpol would also be very skeptical of any request for the issuance of an international arrest warrant. To be clear, however, this law, and you can find in my Twitter feed a copy of it in both Spanish and English, the law itself doesn't actually prescribe a specific punishment beyond disqualification from political office. And by that, I'm talking about Law 1055. So they wouldn't even be eligible to potentially even be the subject of an international arrest warrant on the basis of that set of charges, because there's no possibility of any kind of imprisonment at all, and therefore would not be considered sufficiently serious to be the kind of circumstance to warrant an international arrest warrant. Obviously, we're worried that Ortega will next, after having declared them to be traitors to the homeland, charge them with treason. Treason charges can subject a person to life imprisonment if convicted in Nicaragua. But similarly, these are undoubtedly political charges, and that will be very, very clear, I'm sure, to Interpol and to other countries around the world. So while, of course, we will be very vigilant and will challenge what Ortega is doing every step of the way, if he thinks that this is going to be a vehicle to be able to have Berta and Vicky return to Nicaragua to face these spurious charges, that is never going to happen.
Okay. Can I ask one more question?
Michael, do you want to translate that?
Yeah, sure. Just
one, yeah, and that's fine. You can do a follow-up after that, even, Ivan.
Como respuesta es los próximos pasos de Nicaragua no son claros en este momento. Parece que los Estados Unidos no cumplirá con una solicitud de extradición para Vicky y Berta a Nicaragua, y también parece que Interpol no cumplirá con una solicitud de extradición. La ley no prescribe medidas penales, además de la descalificación de postularse para elecciones, y como Berta y Vicky han dicho, no son candidatas. Pero la ley no prescribe una forma de encarcelamiento, y por eso no merece una orden de detención. Es preocupante porque el régimen de Daniel Ortega puede llevar cargos de traición en los casos de Vicky y Berta después, y por eso seguimos vigilantes para que la situación, los casos no son un vehículo para que Vicky y Berta vuelvan a Nicaragua.
Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up question as well?
Yes, basically I'd like to know, so in light of what's going on and Félix Maradiaga and Juan Sebastián Chamorro, they continue being detained by the Ortega regime. I understand that Félix is getting to his 50th day detained, in which neither of his loved ones have seen him. And also the Ortega regime is seemingly getting away with whatever they want. What is the likelihood that these two presidential candidates will ever be released?
I'll offer a brief comment on that, and then let Berta and Vicky respond as well. It's important to emphasize that actually both Juan Sebastián and Félix have been disappeared for 50 days, not merely detained, not that that's not sufficiently bad for the political prisoners of the country, but a disappearance is a different order of magnitude of human rights abuse, because you're holding a person illegally outside of any protection of a legal system in the first place. And therefore, not only is the person, in both cases here, both Juan Sebastián and Félix have had zero contact with their lawyers or families since they were disappeared 50 days ago. But of course, we don't even know that they're alive. We obviously hope and pray that they are. And this is why we're demanding that Ortega provide proof of life immediately for them. Under international law, you can't hold a person incommunicado for more than literally like 24 to 48 hours. And the idea that in Nicaragua today, you can hold a person and disappear them for 90 days incommunicado is a very clear violation of the internationally protected right, as well as protected right under the Nicaraguan Constitution and laws, to the presumption of innocence. Because in essence, you have sentenced them to 90 days imprisonment, incommunicado, without them having ever been charged with any crime or convicted of any crime. And so this is a gigantic and enormous concern. Ultimately, Berta and Vicky were in Washington to make sure that the OAS, that the United States government, that many other governments understood very clearly what's happening and heard firsthand of what was happening in Nicaragua, so that they could then take collective action in an enormous way in response to Ortega's abuses. But you're right, up until now, he has seemingly gotten away with it. And I think the big test will be August 3rd, the day after the deadline for registering to run for president. And what will the EU, Canada, Australia, the UK, the US, the OAS, the UN do in response to this extraordinary impunity? This is an important and critical test, as I see it, for the international community. Because if a person like Daniel Ortega can so brazenly and clearly steal an election with no consequence of any kind, then that would have enormously negative implications for, and send exactly the wrong message to other dictatorships in the region and around the world. And so, we were assured by the senior White House official that we met and senior State Department officials, as well as representatives of many other governments in Washington we met, by Secretary General Luis Almagro of the OAS, and by a wide array of others, that they're all going to be working diligently and intensely to ensure that there are serious and profound consequences for Ortega and his regime in response to their actions. Michael, do you want to translate? And then
Thank you.
Sure. La pregunta fue, obviamente Juan Sebastián y Félix hoy cumplen 50 días de desaparición, pero parece que de verdad Ortega es, pues, en este momento no existe ni una forma de rendición de cuentas. ¿Qué es la posibilidad de van a ser liberados? La respuesta de Genser fue sí, han sido desaparecidos por 50 días. Es aún más grave de una detención porque su desaparición es completamente afuera de un sistema legal. Y por eso exigimos que el régimen de Ortega presente una prueba de vida de inmediato en los casos de Félix, de Juan Sebastián y todos los otros que han sido desaparecidos. Obviamente también es una violación de la presunción de inocencia ser detenidos o desaparecidos por 90 días en esta manera. Últimamente, Berta y Vicky estaban en Washington la semana pasada solamente para asegurar que la comunidad internacional entienda muy bien, muy claramente lo que está pasando en Nicaragua. Y para la comunidad internacional será muy importante el día del 3 de agosto a ver lo que van a hacer el mundo en respuesta a las acciones de Daniel Ortega de robar las elecciones, la falta hasta el momento de hoy, la falta de rendición de cuentas. En todas las reuniones que tuvimos la semana pasada, todos los oficiales nos aseguraron que están trabajando para asegurar que existe una forma de rendición de cuentas, pero el 3 de agosto va a ser el día más importante en la semana que viene.
Dr. Vicky, do you want to add anything?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Vicky, we have a hard time hearing you. Sounds like you were, unfortunately, yeah, we're not able to hear you. All right, so let's.
Yeah, no, I just want to comment to Ivan Taylor that, you know, the only thing that we can say is that we will keep doing anything that we can to free our husbands and all the political prisoners, because this is a matter of human rights. And we are committed to that, and we are going to raise our voice even when we have been threatened by the Ortega regime. That's what I want to add.
Thank you, Berta. La única cosa que quiero agregar es que pues Berta y Vicky van a hacer todo lo posible para liberar a sus maridos, pero también a todos los presos políticos en Nicaragua. Es un asunto de derechos humanos y por eso van a continuar alzando sus voces para la liberación inmediata de todos los presos políticos.
All right, are there any more journalists that would like to ask questions? If so, please put your question into the chat box.
Cool.
One last time before we move on to others. Hello, is this?
Yeah, hello. Can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, I don't quite know how this works. It's Jose de Cordova from the Wall Street Journal.
Great.
Can you say what commitments you've gotten from what officials to do anything to pressure Ortega into letting the political prisoners go and to hold elections? It seems to me that people in Washington don't know quite what to do.
Yeah, I mean, thanks. I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, I can tell you who we met, you know, and at a high level, what they told us. You know, I think you'll have to ask them directly what they're prepared to do. Of course, I can't speak for them. I only represent, of course, Berta and Vicky and not the U.S. government. But, you know, we had, you know, 3 very high-level meetings with the administration. We met Juan Gonzalez, the senior director for the Western Hemisphere at the White House. We met Uzra Zaya, who's the new Undersecretary of State that covers democracy and human rights issues, among other issues. And we met, of course, Ambassador Samantha Power, who is the head of USAID. You know, each of them have a distinct role to play based on where they're based, you know, where they work within the U.S. government. But what I can say unequivocally is that all of them understood very, very clearly the direct and frontal challenge that Daniel Ortega is presenting to the Biden administration and to President Biden directly. And they made very clear that they understood that unless there were serious and highly consequential measures undertaken in short order after, you know, after the deadline for registration for candidates expires on August 2nd, that Ortega would have a license to act with total impunity and would, you know, and would proceed to steal the election without any regard for the rule of law or human rights. So, you know, I can't get into a lot of the details. I'm more than happy to speak to you later off the record about some of the further discussions that we had, but obviously it wouldn't be helpful or appropriate to publicly reveal more of the details in a public forum. But I can just say generally that, and again, Berta and Vicky, you should all also offer some comment here. But I walked away feeling that they understood the severity of the situation, and that they understood that this was not just a challenge for President Biden and his human rights approach to foreign policy, but that if the Biden administration failed to take serious and critical actions in short order after August 2nd, that this would not just have consequences for the Nicaraguan people, but that it would send exactly the wrong signal that the administration wants to send to dictatorships in other countries in the region, such as Venezuela or Cuba, among others. So we will see what happens on August 3rd. I think that's going to be obviously the key test. There are a wide array of potential ways that the administration might respond that we privately discussed with them. And I think that they are undoubtedly considering a wide array of potential measures to not just undertake bilaterally, but in partnership with Canada, Australia, the UK, and the EU, among others. So I feel optimistic that though there will be a surprisingly strong response on August 3rd relative to what current expectations are, which are that there will be no response other than maybe some general condemnations. But time will tell very shortly.
Thank you very much. I'll chime in with the translation. Sobre las discusiones que tuvimos la semana pasada con los oficiales del gobierno estadounidense, parece que los oficiales en Washington no sé lo que exactamente deben hacer para responder a la ola de represión de Ortega. Para nosotros, podemos decir con quien tuvimos reuniones y al nivel alto lo que discutimos, pero sería mejor preguntar a los oficiales directamente sobre el contenido de las discusiones que tuvimos. Tuvimos reuniones con el señor Juan González, quien es el director para el hemisferio occidental en la Casa Blanca, también con Usra Saya, quien es la subsecretaria del Estado para los Derechos Humanos, y también con la embajadora Samantha Power, quien es la administradora de USAID. Cada oficial con quien tuvimos una reunión tiene un rol distinto en la situación, dados sus portafolios diferentes en el gobierno estadounidense, pero todos entienden muy bien el desafío que Daniel Ortega ha presentado directamente al presidente Biden. Y también fue muy claros que si no hay medidas fuertes para responder a las olas de represión de Ortega el 2 de agosto, él puede seguir comportándose con impunidad completa. Como dijo Jared, no podemos hablar sobre los detalles de las conversaciones que tuvimos la semana pasada, pero todos entienden muy bien la gravedad de la situación. Solamente para enfatizar de nuevo, el 3 de agosto es la fecha muy clara, muy clave. Hay una variedad de opciones para la administración de Joe Biden que se puede hacer sola, pero también multilateralmente. Y pues esperamos el 3 de agosto para ver lo que va a hacer la comunidad internacional en respuesta.
Yo quiero hacer un comentario a propósito de estas reuniones que sostuvimos. Es algo que Victoria y yo hemos conversado que nos impactó mucho, y fue el hecho de escucharles, ¿no? a estos funcionarios cuando nos decían, ¿no? que es muy diferente cuando ellos leen los informes, ¿verdad? de lo que está pasando en Nicaragua, cuando leen las noticias, a tener la oportunidad de escuchar nuestras historias personales y lo que está viviendo el pueblo nicaragüense. Y ese fue el mensaje que nosotras llevamos. O sea, nos presentamos como madres, como esposas, como familiares de presos políticos. Y también les explicamos, porque a veces es impresionante cómo el actuar del régimen es hasta difícil de comprender, de tan absurdo. Entonces, una de las cosas que también reiteramos y les recordamos es que en Nicaragua no existe Estado de Derecho, y de que el pueblo nicaragüense está en la completa indefensión. O sea, en Nicaragua nosotros como ciudadanos no podemos hacer absolutamente nada. Y como familiares de presos políticos estamos desesperados. O sea, los familiares estamos organizados, ¿no? O sea, nos comunicamos, nos apoyamos. y estamos interponiendo diferentes escritos, o sea, en el caso de Félix llevamos casi 10 escritos ya solicitando prueba de vida, exhibición personal, haciendo un llamado a lo que dijo la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos con las medidas provisionales, y no escuchamos respuesta de parte de las autoridades. Entonces, eso fue parte también del mensaje que brindamos en esas reuniones, porque repetimos, esto es un asunto de derechos humanos. Las garantías mínimas han sido violentadas a nuestros seres queridos y ahora también a nosotras por estar demandando prueba de vida de nuestros esposos y la liberación de los presos políticos.
Solo quería agregar que nosotros, como dijo Berta, fuimos a exigir, a demandar que reaparecieran a nuestros esposos. Y la respuesta que nos dio el régimen es decir que Berta y yo somos traidoras a la patria, solo porque como madres y como esposas demandamos la liberación y aparición de esposos y el resto de presos políticos.
Mike, you'll translate that.
Yes, thank you, Vicky. I'll translate. Berta said, obviously, the meetings that we had last week were very impactful to us. It's, of course, very different for decision makers to read the news or the reports about what's going on in Nicaragua versus to hear what's happening from us directly, our personal stories as wives and mothers of political prisoners. And one thing that we continue to reiterate in all of our meetings is that in Nicaragua, there is no rule of law, that the Nicaraguan people are completely defenseless. And as families of political prisoners, we are desperate. We support each other and organize as much as we can. We continue to submit various appeals at the domestic level and at the international level at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. But these measures have been effectively fruitless. This, at the most basic level, this is an issue of human rights for the most minimal rights that are due to our husbands, but also due to us as family members. And Vicky wants to add as well that she and Berta, we came to Washington to demand the reappearance of our husbands. That was our only request, and the response of the regime has been to condemn us as traitors to the homeland. It's telling that is their response.
Great, thank you very much. There is a question in the chat box about whether there's any legal tool that you can use from abroad to petition the Nicaraguan government to show proof of life. The short answer to that is there is one tool at our disposal, which I expect we'll shortly try to employ, although I don't have great hope it's going to get the result we need. There is at the United Nations a specialist body of the UN Human Rights Council called the UN Working Group on Forced or Involuntary Disappearances. And this specific UN body exists for the sole purpose of trying to facilitate channels of communication between governments and the families of those who have been disappeared to seek information about what happened to them and where they are and how they are doing. So we'll undoubtedly submit a petition to this body at the UN shortly, but obviously it requires cooperation on the part of the government of Nicaragua, which it has so far clearly been unwilling to provide.
Thank you, Jared. La pregunta fue si existe alguna herramienta legal que se puede usar en el marco del derecho internacional para exigir que el gobierno nicaragüense presente una prueba de vida en los casos de Félix y de Juan Sebastián. Sí existe, es una entidad especialista de la ONU, un grupo del Consejo de Derechos Humanos de la ONU sobre las desapariciones forzadas. Esta entidad facilita comunicaciones entre un gobierno y los familiares de la gente desaparecida. En breve vamos a entregar una petición ante esta entidad, pero se requiere desafortunadamente, obviamente, la cooperación del gobierno de Nicaragua, y por eso es un desafío que requiere su participación también.
So we are coming to the end of the hour that we planned for this. If there's still further questions, we can stay on a little longer. So we can go along if there are questions. Obviously, for those who are going to drop now, thank you very much for your interest and ongoing concern. And of course, we'll continue to be in touch. Let me ask now, are there any other journalists that would want to ask a question? Otherwise, we'll open it up to questions from others, starting with Carolina Jackson. But any last questions from journalists first?
Hi, this is Ivan Taylor. I just want to say I understand that you guys are recording this because eventually I am going to follow up the story and I'll be interested in doing a more in-depth report, probably interviewing Berta Valle. So if you can make at some point in time accessible this recording, it'd be of great value because what the attorney explained, I think it's priceless. For the South Florida audience, in which a good portion of them are Nicaraguans.
Sure. No, thanks so much. We actually will make this public. For those of you who are not aware, what we'll do is we'll put it onto YouTube and then I will tweet it out, tweet out the link on YouTube. So let me just, for anyone in the, I'm just putting my Twitter handle here, but later today, probably the next hour or two, at most, as soon as it finishes uploading, we'll post it immediately onto YouTube, and then I will tweet it out. Any last questions of journalists? Okay, Carolina Jackson, if you could also just identify any affiliation you have as well before you ask a question.
I'm not a journalist. I'm a family member of a political prisoner. Same as Berta and Victoria mentioned, we're desperate. Families are desperate. This is a torture, not only for the political prisoners, but it's a torture for everyone, for all of us that have no idea where in our case, my dad is. And we have put all the legal ways, we have gone through the lawyers, asked for the representación personal, the writing that you ask for to show that they're alive, basically, and that's something that's basic. We're not asking anything particular about why are they being charged. Something basic, as we want to know they are alive. 50 days later, we're still doing the same plea and nothing. So now my question is, as Nicaraguan living in the States, as a constituent, how can we support Berta and Victoria's efforts from within, from here, from the States? How can we support, like, reaching out as constituents and at the same time as a human rights advocate? Because this is not only politics, this is human rights. But at the same time, I understand the history that Nicaragua has in the United States and everything, and why there's some hesitancy from the Democratic government to be more, maybe I would say, more straightforward with what they say, what they support, or with their actions. That it's 50 days, 50 hard days, and even longer for many of the other families, the first ones that have been there for 3 years. Our country has been kidnapped by the regime for 3 years. At this point, how can we support Berta and Victoria, and how can we try to be a voice for those political prisoners and for our country? What can we do? How can we support, and at the same time that it will not hurt the political prisoners? Because we know there's no loss in Nicaragua and any efforts. Unfortunately, everything that happens, I'm always afraid, is it going to hurt? Because we saw that the day that the UN got, the same day as the UN met, the same day, and Chipotle stopped allowing food. Starting that day, they only allow families to bring water. Then now, a couple of weeks later, they only allow family members. So if a driver or a neighbor or a friend wants to be the one bringing food or supplies to the political prisoners, they're limited. And those are ways of torture. So how can we help that it doesn't hurt, and what can we do? How can we support and create more awareness? Thank you.
I think I'll leave that primarily to Berta and Vicky to respond to. I do want to make one key point. Carolina, first of all, thank you for your comment and for your strong words and support. And I'm sorry that you've got a family member also in this situation as well. I will emphasize for anyone else listening on the call that while family members have been trying to deliver food and water and medicine to Chipotle prison, where it is believed that a lot of the disappeared are present. We have zero confirmation of any kind that they're actually there, right? And so it's important to say that they are not merely political prisoners, because of course they're being held somewhere, but they're actually disappeared. And so we want to be very, very careful in how we talk about this, because if you say, well, the families are delivering food, medicine, water to the prison, then it could give the wrong impression that we know they're there. And we know, at least with respect to Juan Sebastián and Félix, although those kinds of attempts have been made for them too, no prison official has confirmed directly or indirectly in any way that they're actually present there. And we have no idea if what has been dropped off is actually going to get to them or not. But Berta, Vicky, do you want to comment on the broader question? I think at this point, Michael, we'll stop doing the translation because we're kind of over time anyway. And we'll take a few more questions and then end shortly. But Vicky and Berta, if you want to respond.
Bueno, Carolina, gracias por tus comentarios. ¿Qué familiar tenés en el grupo?
José Adán Aguirre.
De José Adán, sí. Well, I just can say that we are in this together and that we are going to come out of this nightmare together, and that we appreciate you wanting to, be part of this advocacy for the freedom of our families. So I think you should, people that are in the United States and they have access to the congressmen or senators, I think they should, go to them and tell the story, tell what we are suffering, in order for them to use their own voice to help us raise our voice. And so I think the best way is, keep organizing as family members of political prisoners. And I will be glad to keep in contact with you and let you more about what we are doing and the way you can participate and be part of it.
Hola Carolina, te agradezco tu apoyo, tu solidaridad y contar conmigo y con Berta. Creo que lo mejor que podemos hacer es seguir alzando nuestra voz, denunciando, como vos dijiste, la violación de derechos humanos violentados de nuestros esposos, de nuestros padres, de nuestros familiares y también de los familiares. Entonces yo te diría que nos unamos como familia en seguir denunciando. No nos callemos hasta que todos los presos políticos estén libres. Un abrazo.
All right. Any last questions? We'll take like one more or two more if there are any left. If not, we will conclude the discussion. Any final questions? Please just put your name in the chat box and I will call on you. All right. Well, with that, thank you everybody very much. And we will of course continue to be in touch. As I mentioned, we'll be posting shortly on my Twitter account at Jared Genser, a link to the YouTube video of this press conference if you want to be able to access that. And again, thank you everyone very much.